My name is Sascha Jeffers. I am a master's student here in the clinical mental health counseling program on the online campus at the Chicago School. I am also a foster parent. I've been a foster parent since about 2015. And I've fostered kids from age 1 all the way to my oldest, age 17, who is actually co-presenting with me today. This is Kayla. She is a former foster youth. She moved in with us about a little over a year ago. Actually, right as the COVID shutdown in the United States happened, she was moving in. So we've gotten to really know each other. We did know her a little bit previously. We had provided some respite care for her in the past. But Kayla she offers a super cool perspective on being an adolescent, being in foster care. She's been impacted by foster care and CPS pretty much her entire life. We officially adopted her in last February 11th of this year, so just a couple months ago. We're in Montana, and she is part of the Montana Youth Advisory Board, which is a board of youth that are former foster youth that have aged out, current foster youth, and their role, I guess, is to provide a voice that incites change at the state level. So they work on training programs for foster parents and CPS and CASA. And they also work all the way up to like the legislative stage where they help write bills that impact and help foster youth. So she has a really strong voice about this. She has a lot of experience. But this is also, it's a really triggering topic for both of us, to be honest. So as we kind of go through, there might be times that one of us takes over and one of us talks more than the other. And I'll probably be doing a lot of the talking. And then I'll prompt Kayla at times. But we put the presentation together too. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Is it going to let me? Okay, here we go. So according to Erikson's personality theory, individuals face a different crisis or dilemma at different stages of their life. And he has identified 8 distinct stages or psychosocial stages that occur throughout an individual's life. Adolescents are approximately aged 12 to 20 in Erikson's theory, and they are faced with this identity versus role confusion. So it's the stage that they're transitioning into from childhood into adulthood, this adolescent stage. And they're trying to develop their own values and beliefs that will impact their life goals and their career goals. And as they're trying to develop their own personal values, they're heavily impacted by the values of their caregivers and their peers around them. And so they're kind of stuck in this dilemma of, who am I really versus who do I feel I'm supposed to be? Okay, so they are faced with this kind of conundrum of who is this person that I am? So a positive outcome at the adolescent stage is that they stay true to their true sense of self. Whereas a negative outcome is that they have this role confusion where adolescents are unable to define who they really are. And this leads to them kind of doubting their own existence in the world and feeling like there might not actually be a path carved out for them in the greater span of their life. So Bronfenbrenner's bioecological theory is that a person's development is a direct function of the interaction with the people around them and the environment around them. So it's modified by different processes like your genetic makeup, as well as broad features like the culture in your community or your state. And so we have this child or a person, and they have inherent characteristics about them. So their genetics and their own unique traits. Okay, the growth in this child fosters change in the environment around them. And as the environment changes, the child grows, and it's this bidirectional process that they grow within the environment that they're given or that they're placed in. So this Sorry, my chat's a little bit in the way, so I want to make sure it popped up. Yep. So the next, this environment is the microsystem, and this is the direct, immediate environment around this child. And it includes things like family and peers and schools, so teachers and peers and friends and neighborhood interactions. And so babies might interact specifically or more intently with their caregivers or the parents, whereas the children, adolescents, as they begin to grow, they bring in the interactions of their environment with their teachers and their peers and their friends. The environment is a really significant part of their life. The next stage we have is the mesosystem, and this is when the people in their environment and their microsystem are interacting within interactions between themselves. So an example would be like a parent-teacher conference. So a parent in the child's microsystem is interacting directly with a teacher who is also in the child's microsystem, and they are that influences the environment that the child is in. The next stage is the exosystem. And this is the next level of environment that influences a child, but there typically isn't a direct interaction. So this might be the legislative system, the educational system, sometimes like the broader child and family services. And then finally, we have a macro system. And the macro system is the kind of the cultural attitudes or the beliefs that shape the child's environment around them. So what happens with foster youth? So we have, if we go back to this microsystem, the microsystem is rocky for a kiddo that's been in foster care or that is a product of an environment that is abusive or neglectful. So foster disruptions, placement disruptions happen quite a bit. And Kayla can talk about this a little bit in a bit, but she's seen a lot of, she's been moved around a lot. How many homes? About 10 different placements that she's been in. And so they don't build these attachments that are strong because they're constantly having to change schools, make new friends. On top of that, the biological attachments with family members weren't probably strong to begin with. They've been further damaged as the child moves into foster care. So we have a rocky foundation to begin with. Then we move into the exosystem, and from the foster perspective, I feel as though the exosystem provides safety to a child to the point of them being removed from a neglectful or abusive home. And then at that point, the system, the exosystem, focuses more on the parents. So laws typically protect the parents. Child and family services, mental health services focus on reforming the parents to provide a safer place, but the kid is kind of just swept to the side in those situations. And then finally, we have the larger cultural attitudes. And I feel like this is probably one of the most important aspects of that affect foster youth. So we have these stereotypes of foster youth that they're delinquent, that they're bad kids. And that my example of this is in 2015, the Montana legislative system introduced a foster youth bill of rights. And they, when it was presented to the whole legislative system, a state senator got on the microphone and said, well, these kids are just bad. All they need is a good whipping on the behind and set straight. So the bill didn't pass, and this further set the stage to have this cultural belief or this cultural attitude that foster youth are bad kids. And this goes on to affect like their entire development. So until we can change that culture about kids, then that's a big part of building their a strong identity. So these negative labels stick to foster youth as they're growing up, especially as they're growing up in the system. And they hear words like juvenile delinquent and troubled, bad, instigator. And they begin to think that, wow, like all these people are calling me this must be who I am. And so they're trying to figure out, like, am I this person? You know, these people are calling me an addict. I'm a product of an addict. So that must be who I am and who I'm determined or bound to be. So how do we, as future counselors, as foster parents, as former foster youth who have a voice that can help foster youth in the future, work to start erasing these negative connotations that labels kids to think that that's who they are? And how do we replace those with stronger words like this child's persistent, she's strong, he's smart, they're worthy? You know, how do we put these positive labels on foster youth so that we can support a strong and independent and healthy identity? Is there any questions that we have up to that point? If anyone wants to pop in or type into the chat, by all means, feel free. Make sure you have it. Okay. On top of kids trying to build their identity, mental health really impacts foster youth. Foster youth have been through a lot of different situations, a lot of different types of abuse. And the kids that I see come into foster care or while in foster care, and they have mental health disorders like PTSD and depression and separation anxiety, developmental delays, learning disabilities. And this all co-occurs and impacts these labels with them that are like, how am I supposed to overcome these negative labels and these mental health disorders to be a strong, independent, successful person in life? So are foster youth doomed? Is there any hope? They're definitely not doomed. There's so much ability for them to grow. And we as counselors, as future counselors, as caregivers, we have to acknowledge and listen to the pain from the past as a first step. And when we hear that pain and we acknowledge that pain, we can support the change towards a positive identity. We can support healing. We can support wellness, mental wellness, physical wellness. And therefore we can support success as change happens. So what is foster care? So there's traditional foster care. My family is a traditional foster care family, mostly because we don't have family in the area. Foster care is when the child is unknown to the host family or the foster family. And so you don't know a child. They call, they say, hey, we have a kiddo that needs a place, and they show up, and that's the first time you're meeting the child. These types of foster families are licensed by the state. They're trained based on the state regulations. The training in the state of Montana currently is 8 hours total to become a licensed foster parent. One of the things Kayla is working on is working on I guess it's a video that you guys are doing because of COVID, where that is going to be part of the training for foster parents as to like the needs of foster youth. Because the training is obviously not enough. Yeah, the training is limited in the state of Montana. The foster family is also reimbursed by the state, a financial reimbursement. It's a monthly reimbursement. It's based on the level of care that foster family provides. And it's also based on, it's a per child reimbursement. So then there's kinship placement, where the child is related, biologically related to the host family, is kinship. And there's two types of kinship. The other one is when the child is just known to the family, and that's called fictive kinship. And fictive kinship can be if a teacher takes in a student, a neighbor takes in a little neighbor kiddo. And technically, Kayla was fictive kinship because we had provided respite care to her in the past, and we had previously known her. Kinship placements can be licensed and unlicensed. In order to get the reimbursement by the state, you would have to be a licensed trained kinship placement. So respite care, and that's what we had provided to Kayla. It's a short-term care provided to long-term foster families. In her situation, she was being fostered at the time by a single parent who sometimes had to leave to go out of town for work. And then, so when she would leave, I would take her kids. I learned later on the road that they were actually having issues with Kayla and her foster mom were having conflict, and that's why she was at our house. And had we known that, we probably would have not waited so long to get Kayla. There's also the group home settings. Kayla might be able to provide a little bit more information on the group home. Group home settings are where there's multiple youth that live in one home for a variety of reasons. These reasons could be that there just isn't availability within foster families to take on the adolescents. It's actually hard to place teens. There's not that many.
Yeah, that's usually where all the teens go, is to the group home. They don't really take time to do all the paperwork to find them a family, so they just put them in the group home.
It's an easy solution for CPS, and again, back to the stereotype, teens are scary and bad. A big problem with the group home, specifically in Helena, Montana, that we can speak to is that foster youth are intermixed with
Actual juvenile delinquencies that are on like probation and stuff, that have probation officers, or that have been to juvie or just got out of juvie.
Yeah, so that further feeds into the stereotype of foster youth being bad. And it's really an unhealthy situation for foster youth who are trying to find their path in life. They're, we have these teenagers who are trying to figure out who they are, and here they are in a home with kids that are in trouble with the law, and they're being influenced, because we know through our programs and our education that they're heavily influenced by their peers. So we are providing a path to feed into that stereotype by intermixing them in these group homes. And then finally, we have this idea, especially in our community, and I think it's statewide. If it's working, why would we intervene? So we'll find out that teens are living independently in a home, oftentimes together. And CPS will know about these, but the kids are in a home and they appear to be fine. So it's easier for them to say, it seems like it's working, so we're just going to ignore this problem for today.
Do they know what trap houses?
That's kind of what that is. So there's the youth here call it a trap house. We call it independent living.
There's no parents.
Yeah, there's
no legal guardians.
Yeah, there's no legal guardians living in the home.
People coming as they go, kids staying when they want, I guess.
Yeah, it's essentially youth that couch surf through houses where there's no parents. So why is foster care important, particularly to adolescent aged kids? So the idea behind foster care is that we provide safety and security and stability to youth who need it most. You're provided with a monthly reimbursement to help provide normalcy, and normalcy is such a key word with foster kids. They've never had normalcy, so that monthly reimbursement should be used for them to be just a kid, to experience teenage life, to experience adolescent life, middle school, high school life. There's also been, and this is pretty countrywide, United States wide, the passing of reasonable and prudent parenting standards. And the idea here is that when a child comes into your home, you treat them as a child. You give them a normal childhood experience. And you don't have to constantly be asking CPS or the biological family for permission, which in the past you'd have to, every time we practically leave the house, we would need to ask permission to do something. So like when Kayla came in, we went skiing, and we didn't have to ask anyone permission to drive 30 minutes down the road to our ski hill to go skiing as a family. That fell under prudent parenting standards to provide normalcy for foster youth. The other extremely important thing for a foster family is to model and role model what a healthy family looks like. Healthy family does not necessarily mean a perfect family. There's still conflict, but finding healthy ways to model how to get past conflict is an important side of it. So you provide positive childhood experiences for a youth who has not had very many positive childhood experiences. And you also provide those basic needs for them to just focus on being a youth for the first time in their life.
The reason you should try and role model for like good family reasons is because usually when the kids come out of homes, it's because they're getting abused and neglected. And when they grow up, they learn that from their parents, so they're going to do that to their kids.
Yes. And it is really an unbroken cycle that happens. So what is foster care in the eyes of the youth? So Kayla and I were talking about this, and her first thought was like, it was safety. She goes, and Kayla had a unique perspective. She was actively looking to be removed from her biological family. And so she was needing that safety. And what she found was that it was really hard to find safety and security. She also needed real belongings, something as simple as just having a bed to sleep in every night. These foster youth, they don't need a lot. The other side of this is that she knew that there's a major perk that she would have money. So foster care, when a kid's gone through so much in their life, they're a big perk of them being in foster parents, particularly at the age of an adolescent, is that they get financial assistance for college. They get help if they age out of the system. They get extended health care. And those things are extremely important for them to understand that they have some stability as they go into adulthood. However, many foster youth end up feeling like that reimbursement, that monthly reimbursement and the money that's offered to the foster family makes them feel more like a paycheck or commodity, which unfortunately I think that is a lot of times why people get into foster care, especially ones that there's good foster homes and then there's ones that stack their homes. And that's the truth of the matter. And so do you have anything else you want to say into that of feeling like a paycheck?
I don't know, you start to really notice, because like CPS also lacks about giving checks to parents all the time. So if they are using you for money, like you'll see that they'll get agitated or, like mad or angry about not getting the checks.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well,
yeah, am I here for the money or am I here because you wanted to help foster youth?
Yeah.
So how do we support foster youth building an individuality and stuff? So all foster youth, and I say this all because I 100% believe it, they struggle with low self-esteem and they struggle with like a sense of self-worth. And it's so important to treat foster children like normal human children. And Kayla used these words. She goes, I'm tired of being treated like an alien, tired of being treated like a criminal. I'm tired of being treated like an outsider when I move into these homes or group homes. You got anything on that?
So usually when I would act out because it was like there was something wrong, my CPS worker would guide me to take me to a treatment facility. And later on down the road, I started realizing that most of these treatment facilities weren't even good. Like they were on the same game as CPS workers, and they would try to get you mad and stuff like that so they could keep you longer so that they could get more money out of you. And they try to loop you up on pills, like literally to where you're a zombie. I don't know, they were threatening to lock me up till I was 18 years old. So I had to age out of the system.
Yeah. And I want to clarify when she talks about treatment facilities, this is a common misconception. It's like mental health treatment, not necessarily an addiction or alcoholism or something like that. It's treatment for their mental wellness. So yeah, so these unstable environments and and foster kids feeling like they just don't belong further leads to so much more identity confusion. And they end up, and Kayla's talked to me about this. They foster youth, when they move into the home, they kind of assess their situation and they try to morph into being who they think that foster family wants them to be. Or when they're living in an abusive home, they morph into a certain person to avoid getting into trouble. And that's not a healthy identity development. That's them trying to be someone who they're not. So that also leads into this role confusion that they experience in their adolescent years. So parent-child attachments, we talk about them a lot in counseling, and we talk about them a lot in foster care. But we usually talk about them from the perspective of a parent with attaching to a baby or a young child. Um, but when we get a foster child who's an adolescent, how do you build that attachment with an older kid? Especially when the attachments that they've had in the past have been unhealthy attachments with adults, damaged attachments. So even if they had a somewhat unhealthy attachment with their biological family, that attachment was further damaged when they were moved into foster care, whether they wanted to move into foster care or not. So these attachments with adults throughout their life have been unhealthy and damaged. And so we as foster parents working with teenagers, we have to figure out how we're going to build this strong attachment and hopefully a fairly short period of time to give the best success into building a high level of strong identity within the youth. So a big part of this is having these positive childhood experiences that we've learned through literature and through our schooling, that they counteract those adverse childhood experiences. So we know that when a kid comes into your house, that especially an older child, that their peer relationships, so friendships, are some of the most important attachments they have. This is true for all adolescents, but it's especially true for foster youth. A lot of times their friends were their only lifeline.
Yeah, it's because we go through all these homes and we like the homes we go into, it's just not like having our friends because our friends are our family. We learn to build a family out of the people that actually care about us the most, you know. We don't really look at our new foster family and we'll think that well, they're going to help me because, well, they're not going to help me because the last people didn't. So we don't really put up hope for that, and just try and keep in touch with our friends and people that really respect and care for about us and like check up on us. Because usually some foster kids just go off the grid, like out of nowhere, and nobody knows what happened to them, where they went, or anything, because like CPS can just do that.
It's important to allow for space and privacy, particularly with your adolescents. They need a private space that they can just be, that they can disengage, that they can use until they start building trust with their foster family. That space is an incredibly important side of providing a safe home. It's important to talk openly with all adolescents, but particularly foster youth, because adolescents can feel extremely misunderstood by parents and caregivers. So if you talk openly about expectations, but also listen to the needs of the foster kids when they're talking, listen to what they need, and discuss and converse over what those things that both sides of the picture need, you know.
Also, would be really important is to like talk about triggers, because a lot of people don't understand that much about triggers. Like it could be the smallest things, like even like movement and like body movement, or like how you touch that foster kid. Like they could just get triggered and have a manic episode, like out of the smallest things because of their trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. Advocate for the foster youth. Um, Most kids in foster care have had to figure out how to advocate for themselves. They've rarely had parents who are willing to advocate for them. And just an example of how important this could be. We were having a meeting at the beginning of the school year with Kayla's school, and we're talking about like, okay, there's some things that she needs in class and some things that we'd like to avoid. And one of the things was it was triggering for Kayla to be called on in class. And she's like, gosh, mom, dad, I just don't like it when I'm called on. And so we're talking about this with the teachers and the principal, and we're trying to find a solution. And my husband's like, the solution is you will not call on Kayla in any class. And everyone's like, well, and he's like, no, nobody is to call on Kayla during school hours. That's final. Write it down. That's final. And I remember how relieved Kayla felt after the fact. She's like, gosh, thanks. And so just little bits of advocating are simple, but they really help a kid feel like they've been heard and they've been respected. And adolescents need that feeling. It's important to be available when a foster youth or any adolescent is ready to talk. I can tell you that they like to talk a lot late at night, and but you need to be available when they need you. You be there. And finally, most importantly, be consistent. So they need to know that when A happens, B will happen, and it needs to happen that way every single time. And I struggle with consistency, just as a parent in general. But it really helps create a sense of stability within their life if there's consistency. So there's kind of two big things that I feel as though parenting, and I think this can be adapted to a counseling perspective as well, to support strong identity development in foster youth and all adolescents, really. But it's important to really reduce the devaluation of an adolescent's sense of self. So when they're really thinking like that they're just not worthy, you as a foster parent need to check your biases at the door. When they walked through that door for the very first time, you unpack those biases that you might have, or your triggers, or your beliefs, and you leave them at the door. You don't automatically assume that they have deviant behavior. You wait until that behavior rears its head, and then you deal with it.
And usually it's a cry out for help.
Every
When
time.
they're acting out, like it's a cry out for help because there's something wrong. And usually they can't come out and say it because they don't know how to.
Mhm.
They're really never taught like how to speak up for themselves, so they advocate for themselves.
Yeah.
Like
100%. And so when these challenging behaviors happen, you respond to them as what has happened to you versus what is wrong with you. When you ask somebody, a kid or an adult, gosh, what is wrong with you? You're putting those behaviors on them, like they are that behavior. Whereas what has happened to you, they start to feel like, wow,
I'm just because
this has happened to me, causing this, and I can change this. It's not an indicative part of their life.
mm-hmm.
And the next part of this is starting to really promote that normal and healthy identity development. So don't disrespect their individuality. Don't dampen the growth of their individuality. When your teen child is exploring who they are, support that, discuss it, converse about it without judging them for what that is. Kayla was actually supposed to be adopted by biological family a couple years ago. And she is super into crystals and chakra and meditation. And they saw that as witchcraft, and they stopped the adoption without even getting to know her or ask her about it or anything. And that was incredibly traumatic. I knew her at the time that this was happening. So rather than had they just discussed, what this was, they would have found like, oh, she's interested in Hinduism, um, and in fact, they suppressed it, and it caused so much harm and damage that is still being healed to this day. Um, and I think one of the most important things we can do, I just want to make sure that we can provide opportunities for success. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody will make a bad choice. But what we need to learn how to do is follow up a mistake with a better choice in the future. So, this is from Kayla's perspective. Things that parents can do: positive parenting, communicate open and honestly, communicate with them over and over again. And she's learned, like, we're a talking family, but I think it's been a really good thing. So you got to emphasize the good behaviors, the goals, her future. Don't focus on the challenges all the time. It's important to acknowledge that there's challenges, but she has a future. Foster youth have a future. Let's figure out what those are. And Kayla told me the other night, one of the most important things for her was, one of the very first things we did was we had a safe word. And she knew that if she texted us the safe word, that she needed to be removed from a situation. We weren't going to ask any questions. We were just going to be there. And that really started developing trust for her, that she wasn't always going to get in trouble with something. And that to show these foster youth emotional support. They need affection, they need loving attention, and they need this emotional contact, but they need it on their terms. So show them that emotional support on their terms and help them kind of grow and develop. They need consistency. We talked about that a little bit before. Following through on what you say you will do. The empty promises damage that trust and damage their ability to really believe that things are going to be good for them. And most importantly, just work on that trust. It takes time. They have had so much, or I guess so little trust with adult figures in their life, that it's especially hard for them to start trusting adult strangers, whether that's counselors or foster parents. So you really have to work to create that trust and bond, and know that it's going to take time to build that rapport.
Especially when it starts with our biological parents, because like they be promising all these things and then can't follow through with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then after we get like removed and stuff, and we think that we have help and that we're in a secure place, we ask for things we need from our CPS worker, and they're not able to follow through with it. Mm-hmm. So it's like a pattern.
Yeah, a pattern in a cycle. So native parenting techniques, and these are things that happen a lot. Challenging behaviors are hard to parent through. They're hard to counsel through. There's absolutely no, nobody can argue that challenging behaviors aren't difficult. They're difficult for the youth that have the challenging behaviors. But when you're presented with a challenging behavior, don't yell at the kid. Yelling is a huge trigger for most foster youth. It's a massive trigger it's been a trigger for every single one of my kids. Don't accuse them of things. Don't taunt them.
Don't be standing over them, because that's like really triggering. And
that's the belittling. Don't use your power and authority as an adult to incite behavioral changes. Mm-hmm. And you also don't want to mold or change the youth to fit like your own idea of who your family or what your family should look like. Have this kind of blank idea of, okay, I have a foster youth coming in, let's see who they are. Let's build on who they are as a person. So we need to stabilize this broken foundation. So we talked before about the microsystem and how this foundation is rocky at best. And these foster youth, they've been in a heightened sense of arousal, just trying to survive neglect and abuse. And it causes changes in their brain. And so as foster parents, we have to, and counselors, we have to work to connect. We have to work to build trust. And I wanted to bring up a scenario that, and this is something that we've dealt with Kayla. So you set a curfew and your kiddo's home late, a few minutes late, a couple hours late, whatever, they're home late. So you have the option of one, immediately like grounding, disciplinary measures. That's how we're kind of taught to parent in general. Like you set a boundary, they don't follow through. So now we must discipline. Option two is say, hey, glad you're home. And then the next day we say, so
call next time.
yeah, so yeah, call. Let us know what's going on. Because from a parent perspective, you could have been in a car accident. I didn't know where you were. And it's scary to me as a parent not understanding what was going on. So as you can see from these two different options, there's going to be two different results with a youth who's affected by trauma. The first one might send their brain into a fight or flight or freeze mode, whereas the second one's like, hey, they explained to me like, yeah, I was late and I didn't think it was a big deal, but wow, mom was super like concerned about my safety. So next time I was late because I didn't have a ride. But I will text mom and dad next time and let them know that I don't have a ride, but as soon as I find one, I'm on my way. Or we get out of bed at 12 o'clock and go get her, something like that.
It sucks for people like me because I always forget.
She's a little forgetful. But that's something that we've learned about each other. And so we find something that works. Yeah, we do. We find something that works for our parent-child relationship that doesn't incite a trauma response.
Also, like another thing is that our brains, I feel like foster kids think way differently because they've always been on that fight or flight mindset because we never know what's going to happen when we have to leave. Like for me, in every single foster home, I've had a to-go bag and I had it ready for if anything needed to happen. Like if I needed to flee in the middle of the night, I had to go. Like I had a bag ready. Like we just think differently and we're more on edge with a lot of things.
Right. It's survival.
And
it's what you've trained your brain to do. It's so important to nurture those biological and peer connections. We talked about how important friends are, but the biology is important too. Carrie just asked lots of PTSD, tons of PTSD, Carrie. I would say PTSD is one of the biggest things to work through. And it's something that we talk about a lot. And we talk about a lot in our family, like, hey, did that bring up some feelings of PTSD? Did that trigger this? It's something that Kayla's worked on in counseling, and it's probably something that she's going to be working on for maybe the rest of her life. Food insecurities, body dysmorphia, all of these things.
My biological sister has really bad PTSD with food because she grew up with no food in the house ever, and she would have to like leave to go find food or go steal from stores like I did too. Like, and now she's like a grown adult with a house full of food because she has a lot of PTSD about that.
Yeah,
because of not having food, because she was starving most of her childhood. Like, so she has like a full cabinet 24/7. Like,
yeah, and I'm glad Kayla just talked about a biological sister. Kayla's the youngest of 7, and we have worked really hard with trying to acknowledge the known connections. She's still in contact with her biological mother at times. Her mom has a history of addiction. I have met her biological mom. There was a span of time last summer that she was sober enough, and we made that connection. Those types of things are important. She's also made new connections with siblings she hasn't met in the past. Her brother now lives here in Helena, and they're building the sibling bond. And she's reconnected with siblings that were much older that she grew up with, but they had to get out for their own reasons. And because her other siblings are 10 plus years older than her. And we're working on reconnecting that. And it was really neat at the adoption. 3 of her siblings were present at the adoption. So this is part of kids knowing who they are and where they come from. It resolves some trauma for them, and it helps their sense of identity to know where they came from. So some counseling interventions. Teaching therapeutic parenting skills to foster parents is so important. There's a really high emotional burnout that foster parents experience. And even if they're putting in the therapeutic work, but as a counselor, you can help them persevere through the emotional burnout. It's always important to understand therapeutic parenting skills. They work, they really, really work, but they take a lot of time. You have to remember that kids come in with years of damage. Even if you get a toddler, they're coming in with years potentially of damage from neglect and maltreatment, and they're not going to heal overnight. You're not going to see progress overnight.
It's like weird with toddlers because they're so confused about what's happening. They're so confused about what's happening, and they act a certain way.
Yeah. Yep. They don't understand that. And I know we hear all the time in the Chicago school, trust the process. But I was like, oh, just trust the process. Absolutely 100% trust the process. I knew Kayla when she moved in. I felt like she was a really easy kid in general. And looking back over the course of the last year, I'm just blown away by the growth that she has made. And so even just thinking like, oh, this wasn't too bad. But now I can see trusting that process for an entire year. She's amazing. She was always amazing, but like just that growth has been so inspirational. But it's important as a counselor to seek support. These are tough cases. It's tough hearing about childhood trauma. It's tough hearing about abuse and neglect over and over and over again. I know we've sought out counseling support in the past as foster parents because the secondhand trauma it's a real thing. It's also important to understand, I'm going to try to blow through this because we're running close to time. It's important to understand that the systems that have been put into place to protect foster kids often have resulted in further traumatization from them through child and family services, police, foster families, school administration, school teachers, and even counselors. I know like Kayla, she reached out to so many people trying to get help to get her out of an unsafe environment.
Yeah.
And
got a lot of responses saying, oh, well, that's not good. Maybe you should try and change that. Like it was my fault.
Yeah. Yeah. Like a lot of the blame was put onto her. And so, she built this, we just got the time check. She built this wall to protect herself from the very people who were supposed to be helping her. So it's important for us to remember who's the client, who's the client's legal guardian in cases of foster youth, and then again, the self-care aspect, because these can be tough. So I'm going to quickly go through these. So we have challenging behaviors, things like anger, lacking impulse control, property destruction, self-harm. And we use our therapeutic parenting skills or our therapeutic counseling skills to negotiate and compromise and to listen and to brainstorm solutions so that we can get to, so that we can get to kids that have this growth mindset and this I can attitude so that they can build this or they can create a more positive outlook on their life, and they have higher self-esteem. They're not in a constant state of survival mode. They're allowed to be a normal kid. And at this point is when we start seeing that a healthier identity and a healthier development is forming within them. This was actually my very last slide. So do we have any questions? There was a lot of people that are thanking you for being so brave for talking about this. And it's true, it is really hard to talk about this stuff, especially when you've lived it and you're living it. So it's important for people to hear. And Kayla's learning that too, that she has a strong voice and she has a loud voice, and this voice can incite change.
The poll is open, and if you would type in your answers to the poll, it would be appreciated.
Is there any other questions that we have?